Why did it all start between the Tigris and the Euphrates? Welcome to Collapse, where history comes alive and each video immerses you in the destiny of those who have shaped the world. Today, get ready to travel back to the very origins of our world, where it all began. Before Rome, before Egypt, even before history as we know it, there was Mesopotamia, a fertile land between two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, where humanity laid the first bricks of civilization, growing cities, temples with imposing ziggurats, the earliest alphabets carved in clay, and laws dictated by kings still close to the gods. It was here that writing was born. It was here that time began to be counted, that empires took form, the gods received names. But one question remains. How did this narrow strip of land become the cradle of civilization? Was it the chance of fertile soil, the genius of forgotten peoples, or the starting point of a long human narrative, of which we are still the silent heirs? But before embarking on a new adventure, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything. Thank you, and have a good journey. At the turn of the Neolithic, between 12,000 and 6,000 DAOs. Before Christ, a profound change occurs. The climate warms after the last great glaciation, paving the way for new subsistence solutions. Nomadic hunter-gatherers begin to settle sustainably around water points and fertile lands. This Neolithic revolution marks the emergence of lifestyles centered around agriculture and livestock. Several centers of plant and animal domestication appear almost simultaneously on different continents, highlighting the global nature of these transformations. The Fertile Crescent in the Near East is an early and influential center. To understand the future importance of Mesopotamia, we must observe the dynamics of this period from Anatolia to China, passing through the Jordan Valley. South of Anatolia, in present-day Turkey, is Çatal Höyük, one of the first large sedentary sites. Around 7,000 before Christ, this community of several thousand inhabitants lives in mud brick houses forming compact blocks accessible from the roofs. Inside, the walls are decorated with animal and hunting scenes, and the deceased are buried under the floor, a sign of an ancestor cult at the heart of domestic space. Terracotta statuettes, nicknamed mother goddesses, attest to a cult related to fertility or home protection. The specialization of tasks, pottery, obsidian shaping, weaving, reveals a more structured social organization, less dependent on hunting and gathering. In China, in the central plain of the Yellow River, the site of Jiahu, occupied between 7,000 and 5,700 before Christ, reveals bone flutes among the oldest musical instruments, as well as pottery and cereal remnants. The inhabitants master the agriculture of millet and rice, allowing them to build up food reserves. Carefully arranged tombs show symbolism around death, as in Çatal Höyük. This parallel illustrates the convergence of several societies towards sedentariness, each developing its ritual practices. To the west, Jericho, near the Jordan, is one of the oldest known cities, already fortified around 9,000 before Christ. An imposing stone tower, whose exact function remains debated, testifies to human organizational capability to mobilize labor and resources. Plastered human skulls adorned with shells, grouped in sanctuaries, suggest a collective ancestor cult aiming to reinforce group cohesion. These sites are often located near watercourses or fertile plains, a crucial factor. Access to water allows regular cultivation of wild plants, such as ancestors of wheat, barley, lentils, or peas. In the Fertile Crescent, these species are naturally present, facilitating their domestication. In the Nile Valley, Annual floods deposit fertile silt, conducive to cereal cultivation. In India, the Indus Valley develops an ancient agriculture, taking advantage of seasonal floods. The Yangtze Basin gradually specializes in rice cultivation. Finally, in Mesoamerica, the domestication of maize begins from a wild grass, teosinte, which will become a major staple crop of the continent. In these regions, even if plant species differ, a common mechanism appears: the gradual selection of plants that are more lush and easier to harvest. The first farmers favored the reproduction of less fragile and more productive ears, ensuring an abundant harvest. The surpluses led to the construction of durable dwellings, granaries, and storage spaces. The domestication of animals like goats, sheep, and cattle provided meat, milk, wool, and draft power. This slow and gradual agricultural revolution had a colossal impact on the organization of human societies. The storage of food reinforced social differentiation, multiplied exchanges, and created new needs for tools. The Neolithic is also associated with the mastery of pottery, essential for storing and cooking food. The first ceramics, which appeared in East Asia at the end of the Upper Paleolithic, became widespread with sedentarization. Obsidian, a very sharp volcanic rock, was used to make precise blades and points. Obsidian exchange networks already revealed medium-distance trade connecting distant groups, several millennia before writing. The Neolithic rise transformed social structure. Villages grew and learned to manage conflicts, work, seeds, and stock protection together. In some regions, elites emerged, often linked to cults, as the symbolic control of fertility conferred privileged status. The development of common spaces, temples, or sanctuaries testified to collective rituals. Cultural cohesion is also manifested in art and funerary rites, where offerings and post-mortem care reflect a desire to perpetuate legacy. Jericho illustrates this collective dimension related to death. Plastered and decorated skulls discovered during excavations reveal particular post-mortem treatment. These skull cults, or skull towers, would have served to display the remains for protective or spiritual purposes. These practices, found elsewhere in the Levant and Anatolia, show regional influences. The Neolithic Revolution is not local to the Near East, even if it is a prototype center. The Nile and Indus basins also show signs of agriculture and sedentariness as early as the end of the 7th millennium before Christ. In Egypt, Neolithic populations settled along the Nile, taking advantage of its fertility. The Indus Valley saw the emergence of the Mehrgar culture, where agriculture and livestock farming were structured around rivers. Humans learned to domesticate nature for their subsistence. In America, the Mesoamerican corridor hosted semi-sedentary communities that gradually selected maize, beans, and squash, the foundation of the pre-Columbian diet. Milpa systems developed with a fundamental pattern similar to that observed in Eurasia, despite different chronologies for pottery and metal. The Neolithic goes beyond agriculture and concerns collective management, storage, task distribution, harvest security. The emergence of local authorities, often religious, is outlined to maintain cohesion. Beliefs, still little codified, invoke deities linked to fertility and elements, as evidenced by votive figurines. This nascent hierarchy is based on esoteric knowledge or spiritual legitimacy to organize the community. The elaboration of more complex funerary rites, like in Jericho, witnesses the rise of a collective cult, where ancestors play an intercession role. They become guarantors of prosperity and stability, and the preservation of their remains, sometimes decorated with plaster, sanctifies the continuity between the living and the dead. These ritual objects strengthen the shared memory across generations. The collective construction of monumental structures, such as the Jericho Tower, reflects this faith, courage, and rivalry between neighboring groups, mixing religious dimension and social coordination. The rise of pottery plays a crucial role in storing supplies. Decorated jars ensure the preservation of grains over long periods, a vital asset in arid regions to withstand famines. Pottery varies according to cultures, from simple functional containers to ornamental objects with social or ritual status, like funerary pottery accompanying the deceased. The technique of stone polishing, characteristic of the Neolithic, improves the efficiency of flint or obsidian tools. Polished axes facilitate agricultural clearing, while mortars, pestles, and grindstones attest to a growing division of labor. These communities constantly innovate to better exploit local resources and regional exchanges, transcending the simple status of primitive farmers. Each household develops distinct cultural identities, visible in language, pottery, or beliefs. The study of tools and ceramics often reveals contacts between distant villages. The diffusion of obsidian or particular techniques indicates migrations, exchanges of ideas, and know-how, enriching the technical and cultural diversity of the time. Jericho stands out for its monumental fortifications and specific funerary practices. Continuous occupation over several millennia illustrates remarkable social organization and resource management. The skull towers, assemblages of skulls, bear witness to a strong religious consciousness and concern for collective memory, embodying the protection of ancestors and the prosperity of the village. While their interpretation remains partial, these structures mark an essential milestone in understanding the earliest major community rites. The first agricultural hearths of the Neolithic, in West, South, East Asia, or Central America, share characteristics: ecologically favorable areas, progressive exploitation of plants and animals, and sophisticated cultural expressions. Each region innovates according to its resources, domesticating wheat, rice, millet, or maize. Spiritual practices become refined to address survival, climate, disease, and fertility challenges. The first towers or monuments, like at Jericho or Göbekli Tepe, illustrate community coordination and the importance of the sacred. In the 7th millennium before Christ, geographical and climatic factors make some regions even more conducive to demographic growth. Although moderate, climatic oscillations influence the mobility of populations seeking better lands or adapting to diverse environments. Between 12,000 and 6,000 Nardasrs, before Christi, lifestyle transformation accelerates with ecological and technical developments. Symbolically, the skull towers of Jericho constitute one of the most striking manifestations of this new relationship with the world. Preserving the human heads of deceased relatives might strengthen the sense of belonging, making each ancestor a tangible presence in the heart of the village. It is suggested that these plastered skulls are integrated into collective ceremonies to solicit divine protection or honor the memory of legendary founders. Whatever their use, they indicate that Neolithic communities are already trying to transcend the immediacy of the present by connecting their destiny to a venerated past. Nothing similar appears in earlier Paleolithic sets, where funerary practices are simpler, focused on burial. Jericho shows how settling down fosters the development of a collective imagination. Populations, now fixed on a territory, build local mythologies based on specific places: the tower, village walls, the central square, and sacred objects, of which modeled skulls become an emblem. Thus, Jericho will mark history as one of the first large-scale human gatherings and as a place of remarkable ritual practices. Sites like Çatalhöyük or Jiahu also express this need to articulate the community around shared beliefs, new technologies, and a common space. In the Neolithic, humanity crosses this foundational moment where the nomadic period fades behind new certainties. The programmed harvest of wheat, the storage of seeds, the permanence of dwellings, and immersion in a denser symbolic universe. From this complex and diverse soil will later emerge historical Mesopotamia with its city-states and administrative innovations. Long before Uruk or Ur, the seed is already planted, that of a society capable of mastering nature, erecting monuments, and weaving spiritual bonds around common ancestors. Far from being an isolated phenomenon, the Neolithic is a global phenomenon, and it is within this slow global maturation that the later destiny of the Fertile Crescent is inscribed. Mesopotamia, located in the region corresponding to modern-day Iraq and certain areas of Syria, Turkey, and Iran, constitutes one of the first centers of complex cultures. Before discussing dynasties and urban achievements, it is essential to understand the geoclimatic framework of the Fertile Crescent, of which it forms the eastern part. This arc-shaped area, stretching from the Levant to the Persian Gulf, benefited from a water supply and fertile soils. However, the conditions were contrasting between the north and the south. Upper Mesopotamia, in the north, receives regular rainfall thanks to a Mediterranean climate. Close to the Taurus and Zagros mountain ranges, it allows for agriculture without massive irrigation, based on barley and wheat, on wide, drained plateaus. Its cool valleys favor plant diversity and attract transhumant populations. Conversely, Lower Mesopotamia, in the south, dominated by the plains crossed by the Tigris and Euphrates, is largely arid. The intense summer heat makes irrigation indispensable for agriculture. The determining factor of this region is the fertile silt deposited by the floods of the two rivers. In the southern plain, these floods, although sometimes destructive, leave behind rich sediments. To exploit this agricultural potential, meticulous water management is required. The inhabitants design canals, dikes, and reservoirs to channel and store water. These facilities allow for the cultivation of vast areas, an indispensable condition for the emergence of complex societies capable of producing surpluses and structuring social hierarchy. The region also experienced significant climatic variations influencing the evolution of communities. Around 6200 before Christ, a wet phase promotes the regularity of rivers and the abundance of rains, facilitating settlement and agricultural development. By 4000 before Christ, a drier climate sets in, reducing rains and pushing populations to perfect their irrigation systems. Initial damming techniques become a more elaborate hydraulic network, adapted to new constraints. In Lower Mesopotamia, water management relies on various devices. Main canals divert water, while dikes protect crops from floods. Retention basins store water to redistribute it during dry periods. The use of the shaduf, a lever with a counterweight equipped with a bucket, facilitates the lifting of water to elevated fields. This simple yet effective technique relieves workers and ensures constant watering. Over time, these hydraulic systems have not only allowed survival in an arid environment, but also fostered intensive agriculture and encouraged population growth. Although centered on agricultural supply, hydraulic developments also structured transport and trade networks. Secondary canals served as waterways to transport grains, oil, clay, or reeds. Since the Ubaid period, exchanges developed along these axes. Light boats allowed for traveling up or down the current with a significant cargo. This circulation fostered cultural mixing, disseminating agricultural, hydraulic, or artisanal innovations, and accelerating the adoption of common practices. The quality of the soils depended on silt deposits and climatic conditions. When river flows decreased, salinity increased, harming crops. Continuous irrigation under intense sunlight fostered the accumulation of salts. Ancient tablets mention techniques such as leaching or crop rotation, but these methods were not always sufficient to prevent land degradation, forcing some groups to migrate or adapt their exploitation. This fragility explains the constant search for hydraulic solutions and the appearance of specialists in the maintenance of structures and management of the agricultural calendar. Sumerian mythology illustrates these issues through tales like that of the Salt Kingdom of Abasal, a fictional ruler whose territory is said to have been ravaged by salinization after poor canal management. This story served as a warning about the importance of infrastructure maintenance. Sumerian scribes likely used it to convey lessons of caution in the administration of natural resources. Cuneiform texts from sites like Nippur, Lagash, or Ur witnessed a treatise on irrigation. The kings, invested with religious authority, presented themselves as guarantors of hydrological balance, claiming to have dug or restored canals, dried marshes, or embanked flooded areas. These achievements affirmed their legitimacy. Temples and local elites participated in the maintenance, and water management relied on cooperation between political, religious, and military powers. In the north, sufficient rainfall allowed agriculture without much reliance on irrigation. Canals were still built, but mainly served to channel rains or small tributaries. Villages, located near watercourses or seasonal wadis, practiced mixed agriculture combining cereals and livestock. This more flexible organization and the available natural resources limited the need for major hydraulic works, though not rendering them locally unnecessary. Despite these differences, all of Mesopotamia had to cope with progressive aridification. Responses varied between the north and south, but all required structured forms of organization. Water control contributed to the emergence of centralized powers. The construction of canals, levees, and the use of tools like the shaduf reinforced the authority of the elites, often linked to a temple or a royal court. In this demanding context, the first city-states emerged. The climate, linked to the relief, strongly structured the Fertile Crescent. The regular rains of the north allowed for more flexible local management, while the south had to rely on ambitious collective projects. Technical management was accompanied by spiritual beliefs. Agricultural prosperity was perceived as a divine sign. Climatic hazards were seen as manifestations of divine favor or anger, linking cosmology with environmental observation. Ultimately, the Fertile Crescent was not a uniform entity. While the north benefited from a milder climate, the south depended on a complex irrigation system. Ancient societies, aware of these contrasts, developed adaptation techniques, canals, levees, shaduf. Myths, like that of Abasal, highlight the vital importance of water management. Without these innovations and collective involvement, Mesopotamian civilization would not have thrived. Modern excavations confirm the ingenuity of the hydraulic devices designed along this ancient shoreline. During the Ubaid period, between 6500 and 4000 before Christ, Mesopotamia embarked on a decisive turning point in the organization of village communities settled along the fertile plains of the Tigris and Euphrates. Large villages emerged, marked by more complex social structures and the presence of temples. The improvement of irrigation techniques enriched the soils, allowed for food surpluses, and stimulated job specialization, barter, and exchanges between communities. Eridu, near the southern Mesopotamian marshes, is one of the most emblematic sites of this period. Considered one of the first cities, it reveals continuous occupation over centuries. At the center of the remains, a primitive cult building testifies to an ancient ritual life, dedicated to local deities, probably linked to water, a source of prosperity. Tel al-Ubaid, the eponymous site of this culture, also provides key elements on agricultural and social evolution. Besides its typical decorated pottery, refined tools and dwellings of varying sizes have been found, signs of emerging inequalities. The management of harvests by an elite, likely religious, foreshadows forms of centralized governance that will culminate with Uruk. Anthropomorphic figurines, interpreted as votive objects, evoke a collective cult. Haji Muhammad completes this trio of major sites. It is best known for its ceramics adorned with elaborate geometric patterns, often in bands or chevrons. These decorations reveal common aesthetic codes, diffused through exchanges between villages. For archaeologists, pottery is a cultural marker, revealing artistic preferences, technical know-how, and a community's openness to external influences. This shared iconography suggests a sense of extended belonging, beyond the family framework. One of the major innovations of this period is the emergence of tripartite buildings, organized into 3 longitudinal spaces. Initially domestic or communal, these structures evolve into religious centers. The lateral corridors were used for storage, and the central space hosted rites and cult symbols. This configuration durably influences Mesopotamian sacred architecture, which will be seen in the temples of subsequent periods. Alongside architectural innovations, a ruling class gains influence, its authority founded on religious functions. The priestly elite, legitimized by its connection to the divine, manages the food surpluses and coordinates collective projects, such as the maintenance of irrigation canals. Barley, wool, or oil are stored in dedicated places, like large warehouses or temples. This centralization allows this elite to reinforce its grip on social and economic organization, closely linking sacred power and administration. It foreshadows the figure of the priest-king, central in later periods. Thanks to this management, the economy becomes more complex. Surpluses, grains, dried fish, textiles, pottery, circulate increasingly far along the waterways, attracting new partners. The communities of Ubaid capitalize on their position between the Tigris and Euphrates Delta, the northern mountains, and the Persian Gulf. Maritime trading posts then connect Mesopotamia to the Arabian Peninsula. Remnants of diorite imported from Oman attest to these long-distance exchanges, heralding the rise of a broader international trade. Contacts with Gulf territories are not just commercial. They promote a cultural mix. Mesopotamian navigators use rudimentary sea routes to bring back rare materials and new ideas. River and coastal navigation, still modest, nonetheless marks an advancement that prepares for more ambitious expeditions. The exchanges might have included the barter of finished products, the transmission of agricultural knowledge, or the introduction of ritual practices. Gradually, Mesopotamia opens to a broadened horizon, initiating a tradition of enduring exchanges. Added to this economic and cultural boom is a new artistic creativity. Decorated pottery, shell or stone jewelry, and clay figurines testify to this richness. The statuettes of the Dame with the Fringed Skirt, discovered in several exemplars, stand out for their polychromy and attention to detail. The skirt, painted or incised, evokes a ceremonial costume, while hairstyle and posture suggest a high status, perhaps that of a priestess or a protective figure. Although their precise function remains debated, these statuettes meet needs for devotion or commemoration. Offerings to secure divine favor, they symbolize prosperity, fertility, or protection, or embody founding ancestors whose memory needed preserving. The use of dyes to paint them shows a desire to enhance their visual impact, suggesting a central role in rituals. They accompanied cultic practices and strengthened the religious bond between communities, the earth, and the unseen. These objects also reveal technical progress in clay firing and pigment mastery. The colors, reds, browns, demonstrate experimentation with local minerals. The precision of faces and patterns attests to the growing dexterity of artisans. This artistic evolution accompanies the social transformations of the Ubaid period, marked by hierarchization and the rise of new cultural values. The making of these statuettes contributes to the construction of a collective identity that the religious elite, seen as mediators between humans and gods, appropriates. The development of large villages like Eridu also relies on the mastery of hydraulic techniques. Without reaching the complexity of later systems, early dikes and canals make it possible to manage floods and irrigate fields. This organization, directed by the priestly elite, increases harvests, promotes population growth, and job specialization. The temple, both a logistical and spiritual center, becomes the heart of community life, legitimizing the power of those who administer it. In the more arid regions of the south, the construction of secondary canals requires a significant workforce. In a harsh climate, these works are essential to prevent famines and shortages. Led by religious or administrative leaders, the populations build dikes and rudimentary water lifting systems. Later texts remind us of the symbolic value of these actions. Distributing water means preserving life and maintaining the cosmic order. Even without written documents from the era, this ideology already seems present in the mindsets. Over time, the Ubaid period draws the first contours of an urban revolution, modest yet decisive. Villages expand, religious elites assert themselves, and art becomes more refined. The collective management of resources, the links between communities, notably through maritime trading posts, and the central role of the temple herald the major traits of future Mesopotamian civilizations. The statuettes of the Lady with the Fringed Skirt, whether offerings or tutelary figures, reflect a society in search of protection and legitimacy through the sacred. The legacy of Ubaid is found in architecture as well as in social organization. The examples of Eridu, Tel al-Ubaid, and Haji Muhammad show how these communities prepared for urban growth. The emergence of tripartite buildings, water management, and the rise of a religious elite announce a more complex civilization that the following period, that of Uruk, will bring to its peak. Yet, the ritual dimension remains central, as evidenced by polychrome figurines, and the importance given to cultic practices around the temple. Around 4000 before Christ, in the alluvial plain of southern Mesopotamia, Uruk stands out from its modest neighboring human groups. Bathed by the Euphrates, the region benefits from a fertile soil, conducive to the cultivation of barley and wheat, as well as livestock farming. This abundance supports marked demographic growth. Families leave their hamlets to join a burgeoning urban center where dwellings and warehouses multiply. As the population grows, resources are organized around collective storage places, and elites emerge to manage the surpluses. This dynamic initiates the first traits of a state. A new mindset emerges, oriented towards city life rather than agricultural life. Uruk surpasses other sites and becomes a major cultural and economic center. Its dynamism is reflected in major construction projects, a more structured society, and technical innovations adapted to collective needs. Uruk's urbanism reveals a careful organization. The builders adopt an orthogonal grid with perpendicular streets and clearly delineated functional areas. Two emblematic neighborhoods illustrate this planning: Ayena, a religious complex dedicated to the goddess Inanna, and Kulaba, centered around the sanctuary of An, god of the sky. These enclosures host rites and ceremonies reinforcing social cohesion. Thanks to significant human mobilization, the builders erect walls of mud bricks, trace roads, and develop squares. Brick becomes the favored material for infrastructures, often adorned with colorful clay cones, forming geometric patterns. These architectural choices affirm Uruk's urban identity and contribute to its regional influence. In this context, the management of food stocks becomes a central issue. To secure the reserves, administrators adopt a new tool, the cylinder seal. Before this, plaque seals or fingerprints were used, but their effectiveness remained limited. Worn around the neck or wrist, the cylinder seal, rolled on wet clay, leaves a unique imprint decorated with figurative or geometric motifs. It allows for the authentication of goods and the clear attribution of responsibility, discouraging theft and falsifications. This usage marks a decisive step in administrative organization. Seal engravers gain recognition, and certain noble families stand out with the quality and originality of their motifs. This practice inaugurates a new form of control and reinforces the power of a forming elite. The appearance of writing in Uruk, one of the greatest revolutions in human history, is part of a dynamic of resource management and exchange. Before scribes traced signs on tablets, administrators used small clay tokens, called calculi, to count products. These tokens, in various shapes, corresponded to different types of goods or units. Often kept in sealed clay envelopes, they allowed for precise inventory. By breaking the envelope, one could access the contents. This system, becoming insufficient with population growth and administrative complexity, evolved. Scribes began to engrave symbols on the surface of the envelopes, representing the tokens they contained, thus eliminating the need to break them open. This led to the creation of the first tablets, each sign representing an object or a quantity. A tablet from Uruk, for example, mentions the beer ration allocated to a worker, highlighting the importance of this beverage in daily life. These pictograms eventually simplified, giving rise to a proto-writing system initially used for accounting. The use of writing would later extend to literature, religion, and diplomacy. Beyond administration, the cultural and spiritual activity of Uruk is reflected in the myths that exalt the city. One of the most famous tells how the goddess Inanna steals the me, fundamental principles of civilization, from the god Enki. These me encompass knowledge, rights, and institutions, kingship, craftsmanship, religion, music, laws, etc. Through cunning, Inanna obtains them and brings them to Uruk, transforming the city into a center of innovation. This story, often tinged with humor, expresses the ambivalence towards the upheavals of Uruk's society, admiration for ingenuity, but concern about the imbalances it may generate. From managing granaries to adopting new tools, the city, driven by Inanna, appropriates the world's me, constantly renewing its identity. Alongside these transformations, Uruk's society becomes hierarchical. At its summit, an elite close to the clergy, associated with the temple, directs the collection and distribution of goods. The sanctuary concentrates spiritual power and material organization. It exploits lands, raises livestock, and stores surpluses. In exchange for their work, the population receives food rations. Specialized artisans such as potters or blacksmiths gather in workshops, sometimes benefiting from recognized status. An intermediate group, the scribes, keeps accounts and ensures the smooth running of exchanges. Peasants cultivate the lands of the temple or influential clans, producing cereals vital to the community. Uruk thus establishes a social model where the temple, both a place of worship and power, holds a central place. At the dawn of the 4th millennium before Christ, the city marks a decisive turning point in the history of Mesopotamia and humanity. To support its growth, Uruk develops trade links well beyond its local sphere. Close to river routes, the city exploits the Euphrates to transport goods and materials, both upstream and downstream. Land caravans take over towards more distant regions, facilitating the flow of metals, rare stones, and precious woods. Tablets reveal the importance of cargoes of diorite, coming from the mountains, highly prized for the sculpture of votive statues. Although maritime trade in the Persian Gulf develops mainly later, routes foreshadowing these exchanges already exist. Uruk becomes a strategic exchange hub, essential for acquiring resources and spreading its material culture. Around 3100 before Christ, Uruk dominates a fragmented political landscape marked by the emergence of other cities. With its architecture, contacts, and accounting innovations, it continues its expansion with an ever more sophisticated administration. The districts of Iana and Kolaba host new buildings, while scribes refine the notation of goods and services. The first pictographic signs herald the cuneiform writing, foreshadowing a flourishing literary and legal culture. The authorities maintain the irrigation channels, ensure stability, and keep Uruk at the heart of regional development. This effervescence establishes an urban model soon adopted by neighboring cities. At the turn of the 3rd millennium before Christ, Mesopotamia experiences a major phase of centralization and administrative innovation known as the Jemdet Nasr period. This era is characterized by changes in writing, resource organization, and political authority, as well as the appearance of multicolored clay tablets, which contrast with previous uniform mediums. Society then gains access to advanced territorial management and accounting, leaving a lasting mark on subsequent political entities. The site of Jemdet Nasr in central Iraq provides remains illustrating this transition. Administrative annexes, partial granaries, and numerous clay archives, evidence of a growing bureaucracy. The old sealed clay balls give way to inscribed tablets, where proto-cuneiform signs become more complex. Red, black, or white pigments probably differentiate types of transactions or levels of authority, giving their name to the famous multicolored tablets, whose exact function remains debated. Contemporary archives confirm the emergence of the first identifiable toponyms, indicating that scribes now explicitly record place names, facilitating the localization of transactions over a vast geographical area. Some signs may refer to cities like Uruk or Kish. The names of leaders also appear, although the spelling remains approximate, sometimes making it difficult to distinguish between proper names and titles. This evolution marks a turning point in territorial management. Instead of simple tokens with limited meaning, a more flexible system records a wide range of economic and political information. The tablets not only describe exchange quantities, but also play a role in representing authority. Chromatic nuances could distinguish administrative categories or the provenance of goods. The pigments, based on minerals or metallic oxides, reflect increasing expertise in administrative production. Simultaneously, the formalization of varied seals, including the first cylinder seals with mythological or everyday motifs, authenticated and secured stocks while legitimizing the power of their holders. The standardization of weights and measures is a key innovation of this period. With the expansion of proto-urban city-states and their commercial exchanges, a common reference becomes essential. The shekel appears in its primitive form, probably as small comparable masses on a scale. Similarly, measurements of length like the cubit become standardized, facilitating construction and boundaries. These technical advances strengthen political development. They replace variable evaluations and approximate barters with shared conventions, favoring the circulation of resources and structured dispute resolution. During this period, the exchange network, already initiated at the end of the Uruk period, extends eastward, notably towards Susa, in present-day southwestern Iran. Excavations there have revealed items and tablets similar to those from Jemdet Nasr and other Mesopotamian sites, indicating that local elites, religious or secular, actively participated in regional trade and diplomacy. Grains, oil, as well as raw materials like diorite or copper, circulated by caravans or boats along the Tigris and Euphrates. This intensification of exchanges increased the need to standardize weights and measures for a common quantitative language. Scribes perfect their techniques to track the inflows and outflows of goods in warehouses, thus laying the groundwork for a nascent bureaucratic system. Archaeological discoveries include transaction tablets and hierarchical administrative remains. Certain rooms, reserved for scribes, contained writing tools and cylinder seals. Others housed sealed jars, primitive scales, and counterweights, attesting to the regular use of weighing for the distribution of rations or the collection of taxes in kind. The growing role of temples as redistribution centers is clear. They are no longer just places of worship, but spaces for stock management, account keeping, and collective decision-making. Priests reinforce their influence by controlling this nascent administration, often under the patronage of local deities. The administrative formalization is also seen in the evolution of writing systems. Complex signs form sequences that evoke words or ideas more elaborate than simple tallies. The transition to cuneiform writing, still nascent, is underway. Tablets display columns of repetitive symbols, suggesting an attempt to classify products according to criteria that remain poorly understood. Some scribes moisten the clay to correct their writings, showing that this system was already considered perfectible. Each innovation facilitates the archiving and integration of data related to trade, inventories, and water management. In this context, one document particularly draws attention: the seal of Lugal-Kanish-Dudu, mentioning the impressive quantity of 400,000 bars of barley. This stone cylinder, engraved with proto-cuneiform signs, likely illustrates the delivery of significant grain allocations to an administration or several communities. The title Lugal meaning great man in Sumerian and often translated as king, indicates the presence of a central authority capable of managing vast food flows and exercising its power over multiple establishments. Even if the number may be symbolic, it nonetheless reflects an increasingly organized economy where agricultural production is recorded and controlled. The study of this seal and other similar artifacts sheds light on the mentality and ambitions of the era. It is not just about paying workers or filling temple reserves, but also about asserting power. Each transaction, each boat laden with barley or artisanal goods, becomes a political act recorded on tablets or authenticated by seals. The seal of Lugal-Kinish-Dudu is often cited because it illustrates the connection between writing, authority, and redistribution. It embodies the central role of the leader or king in social regulation. By controlling production and granting shares validated by official seals, this figure imposes his status and leaves a lasting mark of his administration. This dynamic will amplify under the first Sumerian dynasties, with the appearance of king lists and monumental dedications attesting to the rise of a ruling elite. The polychrome tablets show that each color could have a distinct function. According to some hypotheses, red would signal lots intended for worship or privileged redistribution, black for stocks for the army or public works. The rarity of discoveries prevents definitive conclusions, but the visual differentiation was a major asset in a largely illiterate population. Recognizing the color sufficed to validate a transaction or status without reading the signs. This demonstrates the pragmatism of early administrators, who included a largely illiterate majority in the distribution process while maintaining a symbolic advantage through mastery of writing. There is no certainty about the actual extent of Lugal-Kinish-Dudu's power. He may have dominated only a few prosperous settlements far from an empire. The essential point is that through this seal, an authority already resting on a bureaucracy and a system of collective representations is manifested. This achievement will pave the way for future structuring. Between 2900 and 2334 before Christ, southern Mesopotamia experienced the rise of powerful and often rival Sumerian cities, profoundly marking the urban history of the region. The political configuration is based on a network of city-states, each claiming territorial autonomy, a tutelary deity, and a mode of government. The four major centers are Ur, Lagash, Umma, and Kish, which develop institutions, religious traditions, administrative systems, and regional ambitions. The concept of empire does not yet exist, and rivalries result in armed confrontations, treaties, trade agreements, and cultural emulation. These cities inherit material and administrative innovations from the Uruk and Jemdet Nasr periods, such as writing on clay tablets, bureaucracy, and sealed warehouses, signs of a hierarchical society. Two major figures emerge in each city: the priest-king, invested with sacerdotal authority in charge of worship, temple management, and rituals, and the warrior king, Lugal, a military leader responsible for defense and expansion. Sometimes, these roles are combined, strengthening political power. Geographically, Ur, near the mouth of the Euphrates, stands out for its active river port, fostering varied exchanges, particularly in metals, rare stones, and wood coming from the mountains or the Iranian plateau. Ur is devoted to the moon god Nana, the city's protector, with sanctuaries and mausoleums, testifying to an intense religious life. Further north, Kish, located on the alluvial plain, is considered the sacred capital where the kingship descended from heaven is said to have been entrusted to humans. The title of King of Kish ensures significant prestige, though its actual influence varies over time. To the southeast, Lagash prospers thanks to irrigated agriculture and a feared military tradition. Its tutelary deity is Ningirsu, the god of strength and war, whose main temple is managed by a priestly council. Lagash sees the emergence of royal dynasties, temporarily unifying the region, leading to conflicts, particularly with its neighbor Umma. Umma occupies an adjacent zone that is regularly disputed, as the border with Lagash is not clearly defined. The main issue is the control of fertile lands watered by a river branch. During the early dynastic period, the irrigation canal network is strategic. Controlling water ensures the city's economic survival, abundant harvests, and strengthens its political prestige. Umma, devoted to the god Shara, often attempts to encroach on Lagash's territories, provoking numerous conflicts. This rivalry culminates with the first known border treaty, resulting from violent confrontations. Around 2450 before Christ, a document carved on the stele of the vultures sets an official border. Discovered in the 19th century, this limestone stele bears cuneiform inscriptions and scenes showing vultures tearing apart enemy soldiers. It celebrates the victory of Eannatum, Lugal of Lagash, over Umma, and imposes respect for the border under penalty of divine sanctions, reflecting the strong religious involvement in the validity of agreements. Politically, this episode illustrates the distinction between En and Lugal. Border conflicts require a war chief like Eannatum, who consolidates his power through narratives, monuments, and rituals. The En, priest-king, perpetuates the connection between divinity and city from the temple. Sometimes these functions are united or separated, which can cause internal tensions when the En feels deprived of the Lugal's influence. This system mixes balance and tension, but benefits culture. Initiatives of immortalization celebrate the city's and its deities' grandeur. Texts mention the construction of monumental temples, the creation of a royal official, responsible for redistributing harvests and attempts at legal codification. Scribes record the distribution of foodstuffs, the organization of corvées, and the calls for soldiers. Some documents also describe ceremonies with significant offerings, demonstrating public piety. During the same period, Kish remains a major reference. Sumerian legends attribute to it the first kingship descended from the heavens after the deluge, recounted in the Epic of Gilgamesh. The title of King of Kish retains a special prestige, claimed by kings of other cities to strengthen their legitimacy. This title goes to the one capable of extending their authority over a vast territory. However, few texts explain how Kish administers these regions, with sources limited to fragments, royal lists, or later references. Despite this ambiguity, excavations reveal prestige objects, princely tombs, and cuneiform tablets. Economic effervescence is another major aspect. Sumerian cities lack hard stones, metals, and quality wood. Caravans and boats load barley, wool, or sesame oil to neighboring regions and return with copper, diorite, lapis lazuli, or cedar from Lebanon. These precious materials adorn kings and elite women who wear complex jewelry symbolizing refined and ostentatious art, highlighting proximity to the divine. Cuneiform tablets show how cities mobilize labor to dig and maintain irrigation canals. The Sumerian word translated as corvée refers to collective obligations, such as military service, providing pack animals, or building enclosure walls. The archives mention the distribution of beer and cereal rations to workers, a system partly inherited from Urukian organization. Each city develops a complex bureaucracy, even though Ur, Lagash, Umma, and Kish differ in their organization. Beyond the administrative aspect, the Sumerian culture of the early dynastic period is expressed in religious practices that shape the identity of each city. The temples, true divine houses, are the center of rituals, offerings, and celebrations. They welcome travelers, store communal food supplies, and sometimes lend to indebted farmers. This solidarity reinforces the idea that social order ensures divine favor, visible in economic prosperity or military successes. The Sumerians also left writings celebrating the longevity and legitimacy of their rulers, often in extravagant ways. The Sumerian king list records the dynasties of Lower Mesopotamia and the lengths of their reigns. According to this tradition, kingship moves according to divine favor. Part of the list pertains to antediluvian times, when kings reigned for thousands of years, such as Enmenluana, credited with 43,200 years. This symbolic number magnifies the origins of kingship and connects historical rulers to an almost mythical past. This list also plays a political role. Recent kings link themselves to it to legitimize their power by presenting themselves as the successors of a prestigious lineage. Priests and scribes, often on royal commission, develop this official narrative, an ancient form of propaganda to establish authority. For the people, these narratives reflect the divine will, the superhuman longevity being a sign of celestial power. However, archaeological archives invite caution. Dynasties succeed one another at a more natural pace. Some kings like Ur-Nanshe or Eannatum of Lagash are historically attested through documents recounting their military exploits, constructions, or reforms. The Stele of the Vultures, the earliest recorded example of a boundary treaty, illustrates this political reality made of conflicts, contracts, and wars of attrition. Thus, Mesopotamian history combines an exalted, mythical narrative with a concrete, often conflict-ridden reality. In the last decades of the early dynastic period, southern Mesopotamia remains fragmented. Each city-state maintains its own military forces, fortifies itself, allies, or concludes trade agreements. Lagash sometimes collaborates with Kish against Umma, while Ur explores new maritime outlets to the Persian Gulf. The Sumerian kings, whether En or Lugal, multiply matrimonial alliances to seal lasting pacts. They know that a new balance of power can emerge as soon as a city extends its control over canals or discovers a lucrative trade route. This political diversity fosters the emergence of artistic styles unique to each city. The bas-reliefs, cylinder seals, and temple architectures reflect these regional characteristics. In Lagash, the triumphant warrior king is celebrated, while in Ur, the splendor of the cult of Nana is emphasized. Sculpture in the round produces votive statues with large eyes, placed in sanctuaries to symbolize perpetual prayer. Materials like gypsum, limestone, and alabaster testify to exchanges, as there are few local stones. These objects reflect the devotion and identity of the cities. Daily life follows the rhythm of sowing and harvests. Irrigation tasks mobilize the population outside of the floods. Scribes carefully track the production of barley and wheat to ensure sufficient stocks in the granaries. In the city, artisans produce textiles, ceramics, and bronze tools. Women practice various professions. weavers, brewers, temple workers, scribes, or musicians. The archives show an unequal society, with powerful elites, indebted free workers, and slaves often resulting from prisoners of war. Over generations, this political fragmentation alternates between relative peace and wars of conquest. Alliances evolve, as do royal titles. The Akkadian Empire, under Sargon, who comes to power around 2334 before Christ, will end the hegemony of isolated Sumerian cities. Before this date, the early dynastic Third is marked by cities jealous of their privileges, ambitious priest kings and warrior kings, and a close relationship between religion and power. The mention of Enmen-Lu-Anna, the longest reigning king, aptly illustrates the gap between history and magnified vision, the exaggerated reign durations serving to anchor kingship in a sacred, timeless past. In the third millennium before Christ, Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates, witnessed the birth of the Akkadian Empire. Its founder, Sargon, inaugurated a new political era around 2334 before Christ by unifying often rival cities. Chroniclers and cuneiform tablets recount his rapid rise from his childhood in a Sumerian kingdom to his seizure of power. Known for his ambition and strategy, Sargon extended his authority over the Sumerian plain. The annexation of influential cities like Kish and Ur initiated the consolidation of a centralized state called Akkad. The birth of Sargon is shrouded in myth. Placed as an infant in a reed basket on the Euphrates, this legend highlights the predestined nature of his reign. Inscriptions attribute his success to the protection of Ishtar, goddess of love and war. His name, Sherukin, means legitimate king, reinforcing the idea of a divine destiny. From his early victories, he founded at Agade, whose location remains uncertain, a center of power, where agricultural surpluses, captives, and wealth flowed. The success of Akkad is also due to its innovative administrative organization. Sargon appointed governors, Ensi, or Shakanakum, in each conquered city under his direct control, responsible for managing resources, taxes, and order. To overcome the linguistic barrier between Sumerians and Semites, the empire adopted bilingualism. Sumerian remained the language of worship and traditions, while Akkadian became the administrative and vernacular language. Numerous archives testify to this coexistence, promoting territorial cohesion and central power. Sargon also led military campaigns against neighboring regions. To the north, he subdued Upper Mesopotamia. To the east, he reached Elam, in present-day southwestern Iran, to control trade routes of metals and rare woods. Some texts even mention his arrival at the shores of the Upper Sea, possibly the Mediterranean. These conquests ensured the security of exchanges and strategic supplies, transforming Akkad into an economic hub. Despite these successes, the empire faced internal revolts, notably in Uruk and Lagash, led by former local dynasties. Sargon relied on a standing army financed by taxes on agriculture and livestock. The grain surpluses, stored under royal control, were used to pay soldiers and officials. The accounts celebrate an implacable but just sovereign protector of irrigation canals and populations. The military elite gained importance, and generals became influential notables. After Sargon's death, the empire experienced instability. His sons, Rimush and Manishtusu, had to reconquer territories faced with uprisings. Rimush led campaigns against Elam. Manishtusu acted in the Persian Gulf. The central power remained weakened. the Sumerian cities sought to regain their independence. To maintain unity, the administration reinforced centralization by appointing new governors and closely monitoring irrigation canals. Yet, fratricidal struggles and geopolitical context weakened the empire, making it necessary for a leader capable of restoring its order and greatness to emerge. This hope materialized under the reign of Naram-Sin, Sargon's grandson, who ruled from 2254 to 2218 before Christ E. His title of King of the Four Quarters affirmed his dominance over the known world. The annals describe him as an energetic ruler, suppressing revolts and pacifying the eastern margins in Elam while maintaining control over key trade routes. He went further by assuming a quasi-divine role, claiming to be invested by the gods to reign, as evidenced by depictions of him wearing the horned tiara, previously reserved for deities. To consolidate his power, Naram-Sin further centralized the administration, with governors directly accountable to the palace. Cuneiform tablets show a strong normalization of Akkadian in official documents, indicating a desire to standardize the empire. The scribes, mastering both Sumerian and Akkadian, formed an indispensable elite for the state apparatus. Economically, he expanded trading networks to procure precious metals like silver and copper, thus strengthening Akkadian control over agricultural and mining production, ensuring a constant flow of resources to the capital. The memory of Naram-Sin is also linked to the artistic celebration of royalty, notably through the famous victory stele depicting his campaign against the Lulubai in the Zagros Mountains. Contrary to Sumerian conventions, the diagonal composition shows the king climbing a mountain and trampling his enemies, his larger silhouette emphasizing his superior status. The celestial signs suggest a divine consecration, reinforcing his sacred authority. This artistic innovation reflects the desire to make the king the pivot of the universal order. This stele breaks with the tradition of superimposed horizontal registers by directing the gaze towards the top, a symbol of absolute victory. The absence of gods directly represented, replaced by stars, suggests that the king occupies a quasi-divine place, acting as a mediator between humanity and the higher powers. Historians see in it the first attempt at perspective in Mesopotamian art. Through his conquests, reforms, and artistic representations, Naram-Sin consolidates the legacy of Sargon by placing Akkadian royalty above the older Sumerian traditions. The subjugated cities retain their institutions, but acknowledge the supremacy of Akkad. Documentation reveals the importance attached to the control of agricultural resources, water management, and military recruitment. Offerings made to the king, seen as a semi-divine being, reinforce his role as an intermediary between the community and the gods, cementing a heterogeneous empire made up of Semitic-speaking and Sumerian-speaking elites. The sovereign thus embodies cosmic order and the guarantee of prosperity. An anecdote tells of the discovery, far from the heart of Mesopotamia, of Naram-Sin's stele, proof of its transport as spoils of war after the fall of Akkad. This monument illustrates with its diagonal perspective the divine triumph of the king over a hostile landscape, a symbol of the challenges overcome. It embodies legitimacy through strength and connection to the divine, blending propaganda and aesthetic innovation. This masterpiece, exhibited today, continues to fascinate researchers and the curious alike. The fall of the Akkadian Empire, once a flourishing power under Sargon, is partly explained by a series of climatic crises that severely weakened agricultural resources. In this region of Mesopotamia, the balance remained precarious between man and a capricious environment. A persistent drought exhausted grain reserves and caused shortages. Hydraulic infrastructures were also neglected. The canals became clogged, water no longer circulated, and production dropped significantly. This situation, combined with internal tensions, paved the way for the brutal arrival of the Guti. These populations of debated origins took advantage of Akkadian weakness to establish themselves. Ancient texts describe the Guti as barbarians from the Zagros Mountains. Their organization, probably tribal, was military and formidable in this fragile context. Akkad could not repel their repeated incursions, and political troubles multiplied. The great cities, once united, fragmented, giving way to a tumultuous interregnum. The Gutis periodically dominated several cities, sometimes attempting central authority. But they faced Sumerian nobles, local chiefs, and generalized instability. Chronicles mention the lack of stable governance, paralyzing agriculture and trade. The rare Gutian inscriptions suggest a limited political structure. The memory of Akkad persisted, but no unifying force emerged until the appearance of a new center, the future Ur dynasty. The Third Dynasty of Ur, or Ur III, marks a renaissance after the Gutian troubles. It begins around 2112 before Christi with Ur-Nama, founder of the dynasty. Although the end of the Gutian interregnum is traditionally placed in 2193, before Christi, the transition was gradual. Ur-Nama settled in Ur and consolidated his authority over Lower Mesopotamia, centralizing the administration and conducting military campaigns to restore order in cities still influenced by the Gutis. Ur-Nama is often credited with establishing the first complete code of laws, of which we have substantial fragments. Before him, only royal texts or isolated decisions existed. His code, written in Sumerian, covered various fields: family law, property, debt restitution, and penalties for injuries. According to tradition, he presented himself as a guarantor of justice and protector of the most vulnerable. This organization reflected the necessity of order after the disorganization caused by the Gutis. Parallel to this, Ur-Nama undertook major works to restore hydraulic infrastructure. Damaged canals were cleaned and widened, and stronger dikes protected crops from unpredictable floods. This rehabilitation aimed to boost agricultural productivity and ensure food stability. Surpluses then fueled trade, generating prosperity. Additionally, the capital Ur was equipped with administrative complexes, centralizing taxes and tributes, thus reinforcing political unity around the sovereign. The most emblematic monument of this revival is the Ziggurat of Ur, a stepped pyramid dedicated to the god Nana, the lunar deity. Often described as a cosmic mountain, it symbolized the link between earth and sky and served as a sacred center where priests interceded for the community. Built from mud bricks covered with fired bricks, it housed at the top a cult space reserved for major ceremonies. This ziggurat reflected the political and religious ambition of the Ur III dynasty. Rulers legitimized their authority through their relationship with the pantheon, with Ur-Nama presenting himself as the executor of divine will. The bricks bear his name and his consecration formulas. Maintained and expanded under his successors, the structure manifests royal piety combined with Sumerian ideology. After Ur-Nama, his son Shulgi continued the consolidation. His reign, lasting about half a century, saw the Ur III Empire reach administrative maturity. Weights and measures were standardized, and written archiving was developed to better control the flow of cereals, livestock, and textiles. Shulgi perfected the management of temples and completed or expanded the constructions initiated by his father. Concerned with culture and education, Shulgi developed scribe schools where cuneiform writing, literature, mathematics, and accounting were taught. He encouraged the copying and dissemination of religious, mythological, and administrative texts. This period saw the rise of a bureaucracy that permanently fixed the frameworks of Mesopotamian society. He also reinforced defense by organizing the army to secure roads and borders. These measures fostered prosperity in the major urban centers of Sumer. The hymns to Shulgi testify to the quasi-divine aura he sought to project. They describe him as a great king, wise protector, and talented musician. Some passages recount his athletic exploits, like the run between Nippur and Ur in 7 hours, a feat likely exaggerated but intended to illustrate his vitality and glory. The scribes thus shaped the royal memory to strengthen the kingdom's unity around him. Administrative archives under Shulgi detail the economic system. Temples received and redistributed grains, essential in an agricultural region. Workers, scribes, and soldiers were paid in flour or oil according to a royal scale. Surpluses financed monuments and reserves in case of famine. This centralized organization rationalized economic life and reinforced the social hierarchy around the palace. Trade extended beyond Sumer. The Zagros quarries and copper mines to the east provided essential raw materials. The Gulf served as a maritime route to the region of Magan, known for diorite. Manufactured products circulated via merchants under royal control. Tablets show contracts with other cities, revealing an extensive economic network that consolidated Ur's prosperity. The climate remained unpredictable. A temporary improvement allowed Ur III to flourish, but internal and external threats persisted. The Gutians, though repelled, had not disappeared. Other peoples from the highlands, like the Elamites, watched Mesopotamia's wealth. Shulgi and his successors maintained a strong army and a system of fortifications to prolong their reign. The hymns also mention Shulgi's diplomatic skill, as he sent emissaries, negotiated with distant rulers, consolidated alliances and commercial treaties, and formed lasting political bonds through royal marriages. The Ur III dynasty was building a coherent state with solid administrative centers. This society was torn between Sumerian traditions and imperial innovations. Shulgi became a symbol of the peak of Ur III. His long reign was accompanied by a rich literary production, glorifying his political and religious actions. This cultural effervescence was expressed in sanctuaries, palaces, and educational centers, blending Sumerian and Akkadian heritages. The legend of his legendary race embodied the almost divine strength of a king and the spirit of a state in full reaffirmation. This legend of the running king remains fascinating. The Old Babylonian period, from 2004 to 1595, before Christ, saw the rise of Babylon, then ruled by a recent Amorite dynasty. After the fall of the Third Dynasty of Ur, several regional powers vied for dominance of Mesopotamia. Babylon, hitherto modest, gained influence through political and military alliances with Mari, Eshnunna, and Larsa, seeking to secure resources and territories. Its strategic location also favored extensive commercial contacts. The geopolitics of Lower Mesopotamia is complex. Larsa controls crucial river routes for trade, Mari dominates caravan trade between the Mediterranean and the Euphrates, while Eshnunna concentrates key resources like grain and livestock. Babylon must deal with these powers, sealing alliances through treaties, marriages, or gifts, organizing protected caravans and maintaining canals to support a prosperous agriculture. Hammurabi, the sixth king of the Amorite dynasty, began his reign around 1792 before Christi, in a kingdom threatened by rival coalitions. A strategist and diplomat, he signed temporary agreements with Mari, contained Larsa, and kept an eye on Eshnunna, whose wealth was coveted. This period was marked by local skirmishes foreshadowing larger military operations. Hammurabi's coup de maître occurred when he launched a military campaign against Larsa, then led by Naram-Sin. This city dominated southern Mesopotamia by controlling the grain supply. By seizing it, Hammurabi consolidated Babylon's economy and enhanced its prestige among neighboring powers. Simultaneously, he sealed pacts with Mari to secure his rear. Archives show that Babylonian embassies regularly circulated for negotiation and exchange. Babylon thus became a major political center. At the same time, Hammurabi consolidated the administration by establishing a balanced taxation system, avoiding local excesses. His representatives collected taxes in kind, mainly in barley and oil, funding dikes, temples, and infrastructures to unify the kingdom. Trade flourished thanks to an efficient road and river network, attracting caravans from Elam and Anatolia. Babylon saw the abundant circulation of metals and rare stones. The major event of this era is the promulgation of the Code of Hammurabi, engraved on a diorite stele. This collection of laws in Akkadian regulates society, properties, debts, marriages, thefts, homicides. Justice is based on proportional compensation, illustrated by an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Hammurabi thus unified the legal practices of his territories to ensure stability and assert his authority. The code also sets out professional responsibilities. An architect whose house collapses can be sanctioned. Tariffs are set for doctors and surgeons according to the severity of the treatments. It details the social hierarchy by distinguishing free men, dependents, and slaves, with differentiated rules. This legal framework limits the arbitrariness of local judges and strengthens judicial centralization under royal control. Under his reign, astronomical knowledge advanced. The priest-scribes refined the lunisolar calendar, where each month begins at the first crescent after the new moon, facilitating sowing, harvesting, and religious festivals synchronized with lunar phases. The astronomical tablets testified to a better understanding of celestial cycles, the basis of later Mesopotamian calculations. Sky observation also serves to interpret royal omens and preserve the cosmic order. Diplomatic alliances remain crucial. Babylon must deal with Mari, where King Zimri-Lim maintains a lavish court and formidable armies. To prevent conflicts, Hammurabi signs non-aggression treaties and offers commercial guarantees. Relations remain fragile, and a rupture can trigger hostilities in the region. Internally, Hammurabi appoints loyal governors from the Amorite nobility and establishes a network of fortresses to control trade routes. His authority rests on the balance between rivalries and alliances. This system is reflected in official correspondences. Some tablets show negotiations between Babylon and Eshnunna, where tributes in metals or agricultural products ensure peace. A delay in deliveries can be perceived as a provocation, justifying a military response. Hammurabi thus positions himself as a regional arbiter, capable of resolving commercial and territorial disputes, requiring vigilance and flexibility in the face of the ambitions of neighboring cities. Among the clauses of the Code of Hammurabi, an astonishing trial concerns a transport boat sunk on the Euphrates. The owner accuses the captain of poor maneuvering that caused the loss of the cargo. The law provides that if the captain is found negligent, he must fully reimburse the value of the goods. The text also details the collection of testimonies and sanctions false statements. This case shows the care given to the regulation of river transactions, essential to the Babylonian economy, and Hammurabi's rigor in commercial arbitration. Navigation on the Euphrates was a key link in Paleo-Babylonian trade, connecting Mari upstream to the marshes of the Persian Gulf downstream. The boats transported grains, oil, wood, and rare metals from other regions. Merchants, subject to taxes at each border, sought fast and safe routes. Disputes related to shipwrecks, delays, or thefts were frequent. Through his laws, Hammurabi aimed to promote economic fairness while enhancing the prestige of Babylon against competitors and allies. Wishing to affirm his authority, Hammurabi undertakes monumental projects: renovation of temples, dedications of statues to tutelary deities, embellishment of the palace. These works honor Marduk, the protective god of Babylon, legitimizing the dynasty. The temples also become administrative and banking centers, storing agricultural surpluses and directing rights. This intertwining of religious and political strengthens social cohesion and ensures the moral support of the high priests in his military and diplomatic endeavors. As Hammurabi consolidates his kingdom, other powers challenge his supremacy. To the north, Assyria is structured, while to the east, Elam retains military potential despite setbacks. Hammurabi does not simply neutralize these threats, he also annexes strategic territories to control trade routes. The military campaigns sometimes exhaust resources and impose heavy levies on the population. The construction of fortifications, valuable for defense, weighs on finances, forcing Babylon to constantly adjust. After several decades of reign, Hammurabi leaves a strong state but subject to intense pressures. His son, Samsu-Iluna, must face internal revolts and the rise of new rivalries. In the long term, incessant conflicts and variations in river courses weaken the agricultural economy. Around 1595, before Christ, the Hittite king Mursili launches a swift raid on Babylon, ending the Amorite dynasty. This incursion marks the end of the Paleo-Babylonian period. The administrative and legal structures of Hammurabi endure in Mesopotamian heritage. Later, chronicles still recall his legendary influence. The Late Bronze Age, between about 1600 and 1200. Before Christ, sees the emergence of an international system linking several major Near Eastern powers: Egypt, the Hittite kingdom, Mitanni, Assyria, and Babylon. Around them, smaller political entities maintain varied relations with these five principal kingdoms. For the first time, diplomatic agreements, matrimonial alliances, and structured trade networks delineate a coherent whole where monarchs know each other, exchange gifts, and negotiate amidst regional rivalries. These exchanges extend beyond material goods. They include information, technology, and ideology. The kings refer to each other as brothers in their correspondence, asserting a form of protocolar equality despite their territorial differences. Written documents, particularly the Amarna tablets found in Egypt, confirm the intensity of these contacts. In the heart of this system, Egypt, under the Thutmosids and early Ramessides, occupies an enviable position thanks to its agricultural wealth, the gold of the Nubian desert, and its military prestige. The Hittites, settled in Anatolia, assert themselves under famous kings who lead great campaigns in Syria. The Mitanni dominates northern Mesopotamia and the Levant, crossed by the Tigris and Euphrates. Babylon remains an important religious and cultural center, while Assyria, in full expansion, threatens its Mitanni neighbor while establishing diplomatic relations with other great kingdoms. Each entity seeks to strengthen prestige and stability while monitoring the shifting alliances of the Near East. The Club of Great Kings reflects the awareness of a closed circle of legitimate powers. Diplomatic codes are sophisticated. The exchange of gifts follows a precise protocol. The presents must be worthy of the recipient's title, lest they cause offenses expressed in writing. The Amarna tablets, dating mainly from the reign of Amenhotep III and Akhenaton, testify to these practices through letters of friendship, dowry claims, requests for precious metals, and mutual accusations. It is not uncommon for a king to complain of having received less gold than promised or mediocre tableware in exchange for a rich tribute. Diplomatic marriages are another pillar. By uniting royal families, they ensure lasting alliances, whether to consolidate fragile peace or curb a rival. Foreign queens play a crucial political role, becoming guarantors of good relations and fostering cultural exchanges through their entourage and customs. For example, Tushratta, king of Mitanni, writes to Amenhotep III to negotiate his daughter's marriage, demanding abundant Egyptian gold in return, symbolizing both wealth and respect. The Amarna tablets, discovered in the late 19th century at the site of Akhenaton, only show part of the picture. They reveal a dense network of diplomats, scribes, messengers, and caravans transporting luxury goods. Emissaries travel long distances through deserts, mountains, and valleys to deliver messages and presents. The cylinder seals and tablets authenticate these exchanges. This intense circulation transforms the Near East, where alliances are made and unmade according to the strategies of kings. The role of Akhenaton, known for his religious reform centered on the solar god Aten, is reflected in certain letters mentioning tensions with Syrian vassals, who reproach the court for neglecting their difficulties in the face of the Hittite threat. The tin route, essential for the manufacture of bronze, is a major issue. This rare metal is found in Anatolia, Central Asia, and as far as Afghanistan, making these regions crossroads of international trade. The ingots follow complex routes, linking Anatolia, the Levant, Mesopotamia, and Egypt. Without tin, kingdoms cannot produce the bronze weapons and tools they need. Each power seeks to ensure stable access to these routes, establishing protectorates or fortified outposts. When a passage is closed due to conflict, tension rises, militarily and economically weakening kingdoms deprived of metal. Lapis lazuli, a blue stone highly prized in luxury craftsmanship, is another prestige product. Its major deposits are located in Badakhshan, Afghanistan. For millennia, this stone has transited through Mesopotamia to Egypt and the Mediterranean. In royal courts, jewelry and objects adorned with lapis lazuli testify to a high rank, the stone being associated with the divine. Pharaohs and Mesopotamian temples make it a symbol of power. In diplomacy, lapis lazuli is a coveted gift, displaying an indisputable status, on par with Egyptian gold. Mitanni, located between Assyria and Hittite lands, plays a role as a commercial crossroads. Its territory covers the upper Euphrates and Tigris, where strategic caravans pass through. Mitannian kings negotiate their neutrality or support with the Hittites and Egypt to protect their interests. But the rise of Assyria threatens their position. The nascent Assyrian Empire multiplies campaigns to control the main commercial hubs while maintaining exchanges with Egypt and Babylon. Babylon, ruled by the Kassites since the 16th century before Christ, maintained cultural prestige as an heir to the Sumerian and Akkadian traditions. They bolstered their legitimacy by adopting local cults, notably that of Marduk. Their diplomacy was part of the Club of Great Kings, exchanging embassies with Egypt and negotiating with Assyria and the Hittites to preserve their sovereignty. Babylon also possessed military resources such as horses and sought to acquire gold to enhance its reputation. This role illustrates the flexibility of the international system that integrates new dynasties as long as they demonstrate power and diplomacy. The Hittite expansion under warrior kings like Suppiluliuma-Bethburn is linked to this network. They confronted Egypt in Syria, a key territory for access to the Levant, the Mediterranean, and trade routes from Anatolia and Mesopotamia. These conflicts alternated with truces or treaties, sometimes broken by war. Despite this, diplomatic relations endured, exchanges of embassies, negotiations over certain provinces, and princely marriages. The Hittite archives in Hattusa preserved these correspondences and treaties. Some Syrian city-states became vassals, choosing their side between Egypt, Mitanni, Hittites, or Assyria to survive. In this vast balance game, kings sought to establish their symbolic supremacy. Egyptian pharaohs presented themselves as the son of Re, embodying a unique divine dimension, while Hittite, Assyrian, Mitannian, or Babylonian kings relied on a complex pantheon to legitimize their conquests and alliances. The exchange of ambassadors allowed the evaluation of sovereigns' prestige through the pomp of receptions, the quality of temples and palaces visited, or the extent of territories controlled. In this world where reputation forges power, any insult or dishonor can provoke conflicts or diplomatic maneuvers. Kings also exchanged expertise and specialists. Doctors, diviners, artisans, or sculptors contributed to intellectual wealth and strengthened ties between courts. The circulation of artworks, statues, frescoes, jewelry, created a common visual language of elegance and luxury. Royal cities vied in their grandiose layouts, as evidenced by the Hittite frescoes in Hattusa, Assyrian bas-reliefs, or the splendor of Tutankhamun's tomb. In the late Bronze Age, trade routes expanded. Caravans transported tin, lapis lazuli, precious woods, aromatic resins, wine, olive oil, copper, metals, textiles, and glass objects. Powers made agreements with local principalities to secure these passages. Ugarit, a coastal city in northern Syria, benefited from its strategic position to trade with Cyprus, Anatolia, and Egypt while maintaining its ties with Hittite kings. Private merchants, often from Assyria or Canaanite cities, exploited these routes for profit, sometimes acting as intermediaries between kings. Mesopotamian archives show the cooperation between merchants and diplomats to transmit messages, gifts, or tributes. Egypt's influence manifested particularly in the exchange of gold. Nubian deposits provided pharaohs with significant quantities of this precious metal, prized for its sacred use, beauty, and economic value. Kings of the Near East often demanded this gold in the form of ingots or crafted objects. Pharaohs delivered it, but ensured not to flood the market, to preserve the value and rarity associated with their power. Commercial or matrimonial negotiations almost always included a component related to Egyptian gold. A supply too low or of poor quality could cause tensions between sovereigns, who sometimes demanded additional shipments under the guise of reciprocity and friendship. Egypt, strong in its imperial image, knew how to raise the stakes. An anecdote illustrates these tense exchanges. A Kassite king of Babylon, presumably in the 14th century before Christ, complains in a letter that the necklaces received were not made of pure gold, but of a gilded alloy. He asked for smelted gold to verify Egyptian sincerity, demanding ingots smelted on site to prove the metal's purity. This explicit criticism testifies to the level of frankness and trust between the two courts, where each king defended his interests, his reputation, and the quality of the gifts. Tensions sometimes have little impact on the quality of gold or the amount of tin, as monarchs know they have as much to lose as to gain from a sudden break in relations. However, repeated exasperation can instill lasting mistrust that weakens the stability of the system. The Amarna letters show that these disputes, if not quickly resolved, can lead to unfavorable changes in alliances. For example, the Kassite kings, intolerant of condescension, might turn to Assyria or the Hittites. Assyria, seeking to counter Babylon and Mitanni, also monitors Egyptian-Babylonian exchanges to choose its side. The maintenance of diplomacy depends on a subtle balance. Each great kingdom wants to ensure its supply of vital resources, metals, precious stones, grains, horses, while respecting the susceptibilities of its crowned brothers. This fragile system lasts until around 1200 before Christ, after which various crises, migrations, dynastic falls, wars, climatic upheavals, precipitate the end of the late Bronze Age and the partial disintegration of this Club of the Great Kings. As long as it works, there is an unprecedented degree of interaction and diplomatic regulation. Socioeconomic differences are compensated by the formal recognition of royal status, guaranteeing mutual respect, at least in appearance. In these prosperous years, scribes record diplomatic exchanges on clay tablets, while caravans and fleets travel the routes of tin and lapis lazuli. Gifts are exchanged during sumptuous receptions, and foreign princesses arrive with prestigious dowries, pledges of peace for their husbands. Golden necklaces, gold ingots, cylinder seals, crafted furniture, and pedigree horses evoke envy and wonder, all while maintaining the solidity, or appearance, of this international cohesion. In this political economy, receiving a gift deemed too modest or of doubtful quality becomes an affront that one denounces to save face. It is in this logic that the famous letter of the Kassite king makes sense. It illustrates how this sovereign demands accountability from the Egyptian pharaoh, forcing him to justify the nature of his gifts. Politically, this harsh request reflects the strength of the Kassite king, who considers himself equal to the richest of the great kings. In terms of exchanges, the incident reflects the foreign court's careful scrutiny of the real value of metal sent by Egypt. In a diplomacy where the pride of the sovereign and the perception of status play a major role, these details can fuel lasting tensions, or, conversely, improve practices if the partner wants to preserve good relations. Between 2025 and 1200 before Christ, the Assyrian territory gradually evolves from a regional urban entity to an emerging military power. At this time, the geopolitics of the Near East are marked by the weakness of competing great empires like Akkad or the Third Dynasty of Ur. The Assyrian communities, centered on Ashur, established lasting links with distant regions, notably Anatolia, where caravans transport metals and textiles to new colonies. These colonies, notably Kultepe-Kanesh, become vital exchange centers thanks to the Assyrian merchants known for their ability to negotiate over long distances. The cuneiform texts found on site reveal accounting records and private letters testifying to the everyday life of this diaspora. The goods include tin, essential for making bronze, and quality fabrics. Thus, the Assyrians secure partial control over trade routes. This trade network also relies on a chain of outposts between Ashur and Anatolia, ensuring the safety and protection of merchants through contractual agreements and matrimonial alliances. These exchanges not only aim for profit, but also for the prestige associated with mastering key resources, ensuring a lasting anchor for Assyria beyond its borders. At the beginning of the second millennium before Christ, Ashur asserts itself as the spiritual and political heart of Assyria, with a cult dedicated to the eponymous deity, a source of religious legitimacy for the rulers. Rites related to the temple and public processions develop, and Ashur gains prominence among local gods. Politically modest in comparison to its larger neighboring kingdoms, Assyria developed more efficient military structures. The kings primarily served as protectors of economic interests, with garrisons ensuring the security of trade routes. A regular army began to form, recruited locally and retained through incentives. With the rise of Middle Assyria between the 14th and 13th centuries before Christ, capitalizing on the weakening of Mitanni and Babylon, Assyrian kings launched campaigns to extend their influence and secure trade. Tablets mention diplomatic negotiations, reflecting an emerging foreign policy, while a centralized administrative apparatus began to take shape, foreshadowing the institutions of the future Neo-Assyrian Empire. Temporary alliances contributed to regional stability. Among these rulers, Adad-nirari I in around 1300 before Christ stood out by initiating military and administrative reforms. He established a standing army at a time when forces were often seasonal, ensuring a continuous power of defense and coercion. He expanded the privileges of officers and appointed governors responsible for strategic areas, who reported directly to the central power. The concept of a standing army aimed to have troops ready to intervene quickly and impose Assyrian authority in peripheral territories. Adad-nirari I's reforms strengthened logistical structures with better organized supply networks, integrating caravan routes into military planning for swift troop and equipment movements. Assyria ceased being a mere commercial kingdom centered around Ashur, becoming a major military player. On the religious front, the cult of Ashur gained importance alongside political ambitions. Ashur was seen as the protector of the city and guarantor of the kingdom's unity and prosperity. Assyrian kings presented themselves as his servants, legitimizing their decisions through divine endorsement. Temples received significant investments, and royal rites took on particular meaning. Official inscriptions emphasized Ashur's role in diplomatic and military successes. Cultural influence extended far beyond the borders. Commercial colonies spread the Akkadian language, cuneiform writing, and certain religious practices. The archives of Kultepe-Kanesh show Assyrian customs regarding marriage, inheritance, and dispute resolution. Artistic exchanges reflected the adoption of Anatolian decorative motifs in Assyrian art. Economically, this expansion produced lasting effects. Assyrian merchants in Anatolia formed autonomous communities but remained subject to the king of Ashur. These settlements prioritized peaceful and profitable exchanges. Documents from Kültepe-Kanesh detail the quantities of imported tin, textile prices, and taxes owed to local chiefs. This transparency fostered trust in trade, although currency was not yet standardized. Marriage contracts discovered at Kanesh shed light on the private lives of expatriate Assyrians. They contained specific clauses, notably allowing the wife to travel to Ashur to visit her family or manage her affairs, an early form of assurance guaranteeing a right of return and legal protection. Caravans, protected by guards, ensured the safety of these long-distance journeys, reflecting a commitment to social stability through innovative legal provisions. Contracts from Kanesh, written in cuneiform, describe the financial obligations of spouses in the terms of marriage dissolution in case of conflict. Assyrian women could own property in their own name, and dowry often came in the form of precious metals or luxury textiles. These provisions indicated a certain degree of female economic emancipation, although most documents came from wealthy merchant circles, limiting the scope of these observations. The existence of trading colonies in Anatolia requires a complex logistical organization. Caravans transport goods, people, information, and royal orders. The roads include checkpoints where taxes are collected, recorded in registers kept by Assyrian administrators. The threats of banditry or local conflicts oblige merchants to travel in convoys, sometimes escorted, costly but necessary measures to ensure a flourishing commercial activity and secure routes vital to the regional economy. Diplomatic relations with Anatolian kings are reflected in treaties and exchanges of gifts intended to seal mutual trust. The Assyrian king receives horses or rare metals, while Anatolian chiefs obtain quality textiles and prestige items. This exchange diplomacy does not eliminate rivalries and tensions. Some documents mention disputes related to excessive taxation or the non-respect of trade agreements. Despite these conflicts, the Assyrian presence in Anatolia was maintained over several generations. Between 2025 and 1200 before Christ, Assyria became an emerging military force, supported by Kültepe-Kanesh, the reforms of Adad-Nirari the, and the cult of Ashur. Marriage contracts reveal a new organization, guaranteeing the mobility of wives, signs of an embryonic empire in formation. The Neo-Assyrian Golden Age, extending from 911 to 612. Before Christi, embodies the military power and territorial domination of this dynasty originating from northern Mesopotamia. The Assyrians became one of the major political and military forces of their time, led by a succession of ambitious kings like Assur-Nasirpal II, Shalmaneser III, Tiglath-Pileser III, Sargon II, Sennacherib, and Ashurbanipal. Each marked his reign with conquests, administrative reforms, and notable cultural achievements. Among their innovations, the use of a composite crossbow, made of wood, animal horn, and tendons, offered superior power and range compared to traditional bows. This weapon, although rare, testifies to Assyrian ingenuity. The adoption of light chariots, a disciplined cavalry, and the perfection of siege machines further reinforced their military superiority. Technical innovation was at the heart of their imperial ideology, based on domination by force. The kings also developed an elaborate network of royal roads, facilitating the rapid movement of troops, officials, and messengers throughout the empire. Regular postal relays allowed for changing horses and accommodating travelers, ensuring the swift transmission of official messages. This logistical infrastructure testified to the centralized control and cohesion of vast territories, whose borders touched present-day Turkey, western Iran, and the eastern Mediterranean. Culturally, the Neo-Assyrian Golden Age reached its peak under Ashurbanipal, who reigned from 669 to 631 before Christ E. He is notably known for the Library of Nineveh, which contained thousands of cuneiform tablets covering mythology, literature, medicine, divinatory sciences, and administration. Ashurbanipal himself was literate, able to read and write in Akkadian and Sumerian, which was exceptional for a king. His project of centralizing knowledge aimed to perpetuate scribal traditions and strengthen royal prestige. This library was partially rediscovered in the 19th century, with the Epic of Gilgamesh among the texts unearthed. While military prosperity and cultural brilliance define the Neo-Assyrian peak, one must not forget the controlled deportation policy that characterized this empire. To establish their domination, the Assyrians relocated entire populations with every conquest. The objective was twofold: to break any inclination towards rebellion by dispersing communities and to control the workforce. This policy also encouraged a cultural blending that reinforced the imperial structure. The displaced groups had to adapt to the Assyrian administrative organization, language, and religion, while sometimes bringing their artisanal or agricultural traditions. Although the rulers saw in this dispersion a means of unity, it caused profound familial and cultural ruptures. Tablets testify to these massive movements, mobilizing men, women, and children, illustrating the Assyrians' relentless determination to maintain their empire. This intermingling generated an eclectic human landscape in large cities such as Nineveh, Kalhu, Dur-Sharrukin, or Haran, where craftsmen and scribes came from all corners of the empire. In the royal inscriptions, this diversity was presented as an asset for the crown's prosperity. Syrian stonecutters, specialized workers, or musicians from distant regions were called upon. The rulers saw in this mixing a means to consolidate their power and magnify their architectural achievements. Despite tensions, such as resource use conflicts or complaints addressed to governors, mutual enrichment took place, stimulating the transmission of skills, arts, and beliefs. Cuneiform archives bear witness to this linguistic diversity with writings in Akkadian, Aramaic, or West Semitic dialects, reflecting the mixing imposed by Assyrian authority. At the heart of the empire, monumentality was a powerful instrument of propaganda. The Palace of Khorsabad, built by Sargon II between 722 and 705 before Christ, is a striking example. This complex symbolized the quasi-divine power of the sovereign. Sargon II claimed to have built Dur-Sharrukin there, with its imposing walls, gates decorated with winged androcephalous bulls, and a vast palace intended for diplomatic visits and official ceremonies. These massive sculptures, now dispersed around the world, embody divine protection and Assyrian artistic mastery. The bas reliefs depicted battles, the submission of enemies, or religious processions. The kings appeared larger than life, dominant in their stance and attributes, confirming their role as representatives of the gods on earth. Building a palace commensurate with this glory was a conscious political act and a manifesto of royal authority. While military prosperity and cultural brilliance define the Neo-Assyrian peak, one should not forget the controlled deportation policy that characterized this empire. To assert their domination, the Assyrians transferred entire populations with every conquest. The goal was twofold: to break any rebellious spirit by dispersing communities and control the workforce. This policy also promoted cultural blending that reinforced the imperial structure. The displaced groups had to adapt to Assyrian administration, language, and religion, while sometimes bringing their craft or agricultural traditions. While the rulers saw this dispersion as a means of unity, it caused deep family and cultural ruptures. Tablets testify to these massive movements, mobilizing men, women, and children, illustrating the Assyrians' relentless will to maintain their empire. This intermingling generated an eclectic human landscape in large cities such as Nineveh, Kalhu, Dur-Sharrukin, or Haran, where craftsmen and scribes came from all corners of the empire. In the royal inscriptions, this diversity was presented as an asset for the crown's prosperity. Syrian stonecutters, specialized workers, or musicians from distant regions were called upon. The rulers saw in this mixing a means to consolidate their power and magnify their architectural achievements. Despite tensions, such as resource use conflicts or complaints addressed to governors, mutual enrichment took place, stimulating the transmission of skills, arts, and beliefs. Cuneiform archives bear witness to this linguistic diversity, with writings in Akkadian, Aramaic, or West Semitic dialects, reflecting the mixing imposed by Assyrian authority. At the heart of the empire, monumentality was a powerful instrument of propaganda. The Palace of Khorsabad, built by Sargon II between 722 and 705 before Christ E, is a striking example. This complex symbolized the quasi-divine power of the sovereign. Sargon II claimed to have built Dur-Sharrukin there, with its imposing walls, gates decorated with winged androcephalous bulls, and a vast palace intended for diplomatic visits and official ceremonies. These massive sculptures, now dispersed around the world, embodied divine protection and Assyrian artistic mastery. The bas-reliefs depicted battles, the submission of enemies, or religious processions. The kings appeared larger than life, dominant in their stance and attributes, confirming their role as representatives of the gods on earth. Building a palace commensurate with this glory was a conscious political act and a manifesto of royal authority. When the Neo-Babylonian era begins in 626, before Christ E, Mesopotamia is just recovering from the progressive weakening of the Assyrian Empire. Once masters of a large portion of the Near East, the Assyrians struggle to maintain their hegemony. Taking advantage of this situation, Nabopolassar, a Chaldean military leader, seizes Babylon and establishes a new dynasty that durably reorients the region's history. His ascent puts an end to several decades of intermittent Assyrian control over Lower Mesopotamia. Nabopolassar quickly consolidates his power, seals alliances with the Medes, and gradually reclaims territories under Nineveh's control. He strengthens Babylon as a regional power and restores the worship of the god Marduk, a symbol of the city. This desire to restore prestige and dynamism to Babylon drives him to innovate in architecture and finance campaigns to rid the region of foreign interference. Gradually, the city attracts artisans, scribes, and priests, contributing to a cultural and economic renaissance. After the fall of Nineveh in 612, before Christ, due to a Babylonian and Median coalition, Nabopolassar strives to restore prosperity. Trade routes are secured and damaged irrigation canals are rebuilt. Babylon, at the heart of the Euphrates River network, becomes a central hub for the exchange of grains, dates, and spices. The elites rely on the Sumerian Akkadian heritage to strengthen institutions, with the clergy's support and a solid administrative system. Nabopolassar maintains prestigious sanctuaries like Esagil, dedicated to Marduk, asserting his legitimacy through lavish offerings. The population adheres to this new central power, guarantor of stability and influence. Scribes document the economic reorganization, noting the progress of harvests and the reopening of trading posts protected by the royalty. This policy paves the way for the rise of his son, Nebuchadnezzar II. Nebuchadnezzar II ascends the throne in 605 before Christ, initiating a prosperous period for Babylonia. Already victorious against the Egyptians at Carchemish, he enjoys great military respect in the Near East. An ambitious strategist, he launches campaigns to extend his authority to Syria and Palestine, consolidating an empire that stretches from the Tigris Valley to the Egyptian borders. Strengthened by these successes, he dedicates his resources to great works that transform Babylon. He first restores the city walls, built of fired bricks and coated with bitumen, symbols of security and power, impressing any visitor coming from the Euphrates. Beyond defense, Nebuchadnezzar II also aims for religious and aesthetic splendor, launching the construction of temples dedicated to Marduk, Ishtar, and other deities. Each building is integrated into a harmonious urban plan that enhances the city and royal presence. The Ishtar Gate, emblematic of this era, embodies the technical excellence and grandeur under Nebuchadnezzar II. Erected north of the city, it controls access to the processional way, a wide boulevard that runs through Babylon to the heart of the sacred area. Its deep blue glazed bricks are adorned with rows of stylized animals, lions, dragons, bulls, symbols of divine protection and power. These multicolored motifs give the gate an almost magical character, as if it opened onto a city blessed by the gods. According to the texts, it introduced the pilgrim into a sacred and royal space. The processional way, paved with limestone slabs and decorated bricks, was used during religious festivals, notably the Great Akitu Festival celebrating the Babylonian New Year. The statue of Marduk was triumphantly carried there, amid chants and offerings, reaffirming the community's unity around its tutelary god. This route also had a daily function: transport of goods, exchange of information, and civil parades celebrating military victories. Another prestigious monument, the Ziggurat Etemenanki, often identified with the Tower of Babel, reflects Nebuchadnezzar II's desire to affirm the spiritual and material prosperity of Babylon. Near the Esagil Temple, it rises like a gigantic staircase to the heavens, symbolizing the connection between humans and Marduk. Its square base is made of massive bricks, with tiers narrowing up to the sanctuary at the top, likely culminating at nearly 90 meters. For the ancient mind, this architecture embodied the axis of the world, a point of contact between divine will and human destiny. Workers, sharecroppers, and artisans took part in its construction, funded by conquests and tributes. The bricks, sometimes stamped with the king's name, immortalized his role. The complex organization of the site involved team leaders, scribes, and engineers. This monument conveyed a political message. Babylon is the guardian of divine will, under the leadership of a king chosen by Marduk. Sculptures, frescoes, and statues adorned the interior, reflecting a high level of artistry. Incense and prayers gave the ziggurat a solemn character, inviting devotion. Beyond architecture, the Neo-Babylonian Renaissance is distinguished by significant scientific advances. Astronomer scribes perfected the prediction of celestial phenomena. Annual astronomical tables compiled the positions of stars and eclipses to discern regular cycles. These predictions served to plan rituals, sowing, and to advise the king, as astronomy was linked to divination. Based on a sexagesimal system inherited from the Sumerians, these calculations improved the accuracy of observations, Annotations on the tablets reveal the enthusiasm of proto-astrologers for rare planetary configurations. This rigor contributed to Babylon's renown beyond its borders, impressing merchants and diplomats from Egypt, Phoenicia, or the Arabian Peninsula. Nebuchadnezzar the Q himself took an interest in these works, seeing in celestial harmony a reflection of the order he wanted to impose on Earth. This intellectual curiosity, combined with theological ambitions, laid the foundations for Hellenistic astrology, transmitted through the cultural exchanges of the Near East. The collective imagination also retains the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, mentioned by Greek and Latin authors as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. According to tradition, Nebuchadnezzar the Q had them built for his wife Amytis, nostalgic for the mountainous landscapes of Media. Superimposed terraces, supported by pillars, were covered with fertile soil, allowing the cultivation of diverse species, exotic flowers and fruit trees. An irrigation system carried water from the Euphrates to the upper levels, creating an artificial paradise in the midst of the Mesopotamian plain. However, their existence remains subject to debate. Excavations in Babylon have not yielded irrefutable evidence. Some specialists locate them elsewhere, perhaps in Nineveh, or think it might be an exaggerated account. It is known that Nebuchadnezzar II and his successors multiplied royal gardens, making the idea of lush gardens plausible. But nothing clearly attests to this in cuneiform inscriptions, and the Greek sources are several centuries later, fueling the controversy. The myth of the Hanging Gardens nonetheless symbolizes Babylonian refinement and the inspired power of this sovereign. These late descriptions evoke vast, vegetated platforms connected by ramps or stairs, reminiscent of the Oriental topography. The texts emphasize the complexity of the hydraulic systems. Water, essential in a dry climate, had to be continuously pumped and then channeled to the top of the terraces. This required technical feats to sustain water pressure and irrigate a true haven of greenery. Ancient chroniclers describe these gardens as paradisical, mixing aromatic plants, palm trees, pines, rose bushes, and fruit trees. The scents surprised travelers, giving Babylon the image of a city where man, through his genius, almost rivaled nature. In modern times, excavations have only found fragmentary traces of foundations or pipelines, maintaining the mystery. Despite these uncertainties, the Hanging Gardens remain etched in the universal imagination, symbolizing the power of the Neo-Babylonian monarchy and its almost divine ambitions. Whether they were real or partially invented, they embody the pinnacle of a kingdom capable of mobilizing its resources to surpass the Mesopotamian aridity. Administrative tablets mention the mobilization of thousands of workers to restore sanctuaries, walls, and irrigation infrastructure. The idea of raised gardens fits into a city where innovation rivaled piety. Water management, orchestrated by a strong central power, becomes a true art, from the field's canals up to the top of the ziggurat, where the fruits of these efforts were offered to the gods. However, explicit iconographic representations of the gardens are absent from official bas-reliefs, unlike the ziggurat or the Ishtar Gate. This absence calls for caution and opens up to romantic interpretations. Some suggest that the myth combines different real elements, like simple vegetated terraces, amplified by the imagination of Greco-Roman travelers. Excavations conducted by Robert Koldewey have unearthed significant hydraulic works, but no structure has been formally identified as the Hanging Gardens. Thus, the legend oscillates between fascination and skepticism. In parallel, Nebuchadnezzar II embodies the builder sovereign concerned with preserving tradition while renewing it. Besides the Ishtar Gate, the processional way, and the Etemenanki, he restored numerous sanctuaries and reinforced the defensive walls of major cities like Borsippa and Kish. His reign, marked by prosperity, relies on a centralized administration and a tax system funding these colossal enterprises. The archives indicate abundant wealth from tributes and agricultural contributions, reinforcing Babylon as a hub of regional commerce. The embellishment of the capital reflects the Mesopotamian ideal, honoring the gods, ruling with justice, and leaving a lasting mark. Greek accounts, although later, highlight the impressive character of Babylon. Herodotus describes a city with monumental walls and well-laid streets, while Ctesias extols the splendor of its palaces and gardens. While some details remain unverifiable, they contribute to forging the image of a metropolis that matches its king. Royal propaganda extols this grandeur. Every brick bears the mention of the sovereign. Every relief praises his divine protection. Nebuchadnezzar II remains the most illustrious figure of the Neo-Babylonian dynasty, a symbol of cultural and artistic renewal. Although his empire fell in 539 when Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon, his legacy endures in tales and relics that still fascinate. Mesopotamian science, linked to administrative and religious practices, relies on knowledge that has extensively influenced subsequent eras. Scribes, priests, and healers developed methods of calculation, astronomical observation, and empirical medicine still recognized today. We will see the sexagesimal system, the mathematical advancements illustrated by tablets like Y before Christ 7289, the importance of stellar catalogs such as MUL, Apin, as well as the Mesopotamian vision of health that inspired scholars like the medieval physician Al-Razi. Daily life was organized around hierarchical social structures, agricultural activities centered on cereals and dates, and a significant role for elite women, some of whom held prestigious positions. We will also discuss the intertwined literature and religion with a complex pantheon before presenting artistic production highlighting the craftsmanship of Mesopotamian artisans. At the heart of this science is the sexagesimal system, a calculation method based on base 60, still visible today in the division of time into minutes and seconds. This system probably facilitated the distribution of loot, the keeping of records, and the calculation of harvests. Clay tablets, the main medium of knowledge, attest to this. The tablet, Y before Christ, 7289, discovered in the Yale collection and dating from around 1800 before Christ, offers a very precise approximation of the square root of 2, demonstrating the geometric and numerical mastery of Mesopotamian scribes. In parallel, astronomy holds an important place. Astronomers compose celestial catalogs, like MUL, Apin, written at the end of the 2nd millennium before Christ, which classifies and studies visible constellations. They indicate the times of rising and setting of stars, facilitating the creation of increasingly precise lunisolar calendars. Some researchers see in this the beginnings of astrology, even though the observation initially aimed to predict major events for the city, floods, sowing periods, or military unrest. In a strong religious culture, each stellar phenomenon is interpreted as a divine message, with eclipses or conjunctions announcing famine or the rise of a rival king. This expertise is the result of patient observation, recorded by generations of priest astronomers. The field of medicine combines empirical techniques and magical religious practices. Some tablets describe fascinating diagnoses, such as that of the phantom hand, one of the first approaches to the phenomenon where a patient still feels their amputated limb. Healers, often trained in temples, use a rich pharmacopoeia of plants, minerals, and animal substances. Preparations made from honey, milk, or oils relieved pain. These early treatments, although different from modern medicine, influenced scholars like Al-Razi, who relied on this knowledge for his methods and remedies. In Mesopotamian society, prayer and exorcism often complemented care, reflecting a holistic vision where illness resulted from an imbalance between the patient and the invisible world. In parallel, Mesopotamia experienced a hierarchical social organization. At the top, the Awilu are free citizens enjoying legal and political privileges. Next come the Mushkenu, semi-free with restricted rights, often employed in subordinate positions. At the base, slaves, resulting from wars or debts, can sometimes buy back their freedom. This system is reflected in the laws, where penalties vary according to status. Women can be priestesses, trade goods, keep accounts, or even, exceptionally, become scribes. Enheduanna, daughter of King Sargon of Akkad, around 2300. Before Christi, is the first known author, signing her hymns dedicated to the goddess Inanna, demonstrating scholarly knowledge and spiritual authority accessible to certain high-ranking women. The economy long relies on agriculture, nourished by the fertility of the Tigris and Euphrates valleys. The cereals dates cycle illustrates the complementarity of crops, wheat and barley in summer, dates later providing a sweet supply. Sheep farming develops, providing wool and meat. River and caravan trade ensures the supply of missing resources. Resource management requires complex logistical methods. Administrative tablets mention rations of barley, dates, or beer, calculated according to social rank. Mesopotamian gastronomy is elaborate. A tablet from Ur III describes a lamb stew with cumin, coriander, and garlic, prepared in a creamy sauce, demonstrating a refined culinary art already recorded in writing. On the religious level, a complex pantheon establishes cosmic authority. At the top, An, god of the sky, Enlil, god of the atmosphere, and Enki, god of fresh waters and wisdom, have complementary roles. Gradually, Marduk, associated with Babylon, becomes a major deity under the Babylonian dynasty. Each city venerates its tutelary deity, whose temple manages economic and religious activities. Priests centralize offerings, organize rituals, and maintain the balance between the visible and invisible worlds. Myths abound, from the creation story to heroic epics. The Epic of Gilgamesh illustrates this universe. It recounts the quest for immortality of the king of Uruk and his companion Enkidu, addresses the theme of the flood, and explores the confrontation between humans and gods, mortality, and the quest for a lasting legacy. Engraved on tablets, this work is one of the earliest examples of an epic, showcasing the rich Mesopotamian narrative. Religious practices are accompanied by incantations aimed at warding off physical or symbolic evils. Among them, the incantation Shurpu is a ritual intended to cancel words spoken inadvertently and deemed harmful. Purifying formulas are recited before letting the fire consume the verbal fault, bringing the officiant back to purity. Some see it as the ancestor of superstitions like touching wood to neutralize a bad omen. The importance placed on words is also manifested in divination by observing a sheep's liver, interpreted as a divine message. Speech, oral or written, is thus considered a powerful vector of influence, justifying the use of annulment or exorcism formulas. Arts and crafts are another Mesopotamian pillar, revealing a taste for detail and the diversity of materials. Votive statuary develops, with limestone or gypsum figurines representing worshippers in prayer, their eyes open toward the deity, a sign of spiritual vigilance. These statues deposited in temples remind the gods of the continuous devotion of the sponsors. Glyptic, engraving on stone for cylinder seals, reaches a high level of refinement with fine imported stones like lapis lazuli or carnelian. The seals often carry scenes of banquets, hunting, or military triumph, testifying to the social complexity and distant trade routes. Reliefs and wall frescoes, commissioned by the elites, adorn palaces and temples. Banquet scenes emphasize the ruler's generosity, while war scenes exalt his military power. The later Assyrian bas-reliefs show naturalistic precision, particularly for animals, illustrating the pride of conquering monarchs. From earlier periods, art manifests power and extends the oral or written narrative of scribes. Among the famous discoveries, the Harp of Ur, unearthed in the royal tombs during Leonard Woolley's excavations, illustrates the Mesopotamian passion for music and celebration. Adorned with a bull's head in precious metal and decorated with shells, it often accompanies banquets and religious ceremonies. Stringed instruments like the lyre create a solemn or festive atmosphere. A codified musical organization seems established, with priest-singers varying rhythms and modes according to the worship or the court. The most intriguing burial is that of Puabi, discovered in the royal tombs of Ur, and dated around 2600 before Christ. Her tomb contains gold jewelry, lapis lazuli beads, combs, and musical instruments. More astonishing, 52 servants, men and women, were buried with her. The debate remains open. Was it a voluntary sacrifice to accompany the deceased, or a forced massacre to assert her power? Some believe the cups contained an intoxicating drink, taken collectively, others a forced death. This debate addresses the rare notion of funeral sacrifice in Mesopotamia. Whatever the case, the tomb reveals a complex social organization where hierarchy imposes itself even in death, mixing religion and royal splendor to maintain the memory of a powerful elite.